Now, the next session as we move is the topic is regulatory challenges for private participation in satellite communication. And in the previous session also, we did mention, and it was mentioned by one of the speakers, that we need to create a regulatory environment which is conducive, enabling, which promotes healthy competition. So this is a session which will cover the issues that have hindered private participation in satellite communication sector and possible suggestions for ease of doing business in the sector. I welcome our moderator of the session, Professor Dr. V. Balakista Reddy, Head Center for Aerospace and Defence Laws, CADL, Professor of International Law and Registrar at NALSAR. Dr. Reddy has more than 20 years of extensive experience of teaching and research, and he is an internationally recognized expert in the field of international law and particularly international air and space law. Our panelist of the session, as they join us, we have Ms. Seema Jhingan, partner and co-founder at LexCounsel, Mr. Ashok G, partner and advocate space law, Factum Law, Mr. S. Sagar Priyatham, managing director, Aerospace and Aviation Lawyers Association of India, and adjunct professor, Center for Air and Space Law, NALSAR University. Dr. Ranjana Kaul, partner Dua Associates, and the next esteemed panelist, Mr. Nikhil Narendran, partner Trilegal. So welcome to all the panelists and our moderator. And with that, over to our moderator, Mr. Reddy, Dr. Reddy, for his opening remarks, and then we take the session, the discussions with our panelists. Thank you.
So you're on mute, sir.
So your mic, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity. I know we are shortage of time, and already 15-20 minutes already over, so I don't want to take much time, but just I want to give a few introductory remarks. I begin with this is being a session on regulatory framework and private participation in the space economy and telecom. So there is a dictum saying that law and technology. Law follows technology, or technological developments needs law. For example, in space, on 4th October 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched. After that, many developments which we have seen, including landing man on space, moon, space stations, space hotels, space colonization, and space tourism. All these new developments which happened last, say, I can say that 6.5 or 7 decades. But what we have to do with the lawyers? So when I say law follows technology, on 4th October 1957, when this event happened, 14th November 1957, exactly 40th day, international community came out with the regulatory mechanism through what we call soft law, through UN General Assembly resolutions. So that is what it happened. Last 7 decades, if you look at, though well-established jurisprudence is there on space law. For example, we have 5 important international treaties which regulate international space law, and we have a soft law, various UN General Assembly resolution, all those. So this is what legal. When it comes to Indian context, actually, of course, though India started its activities in early 1963, and we ventured into all these activities. We talk about a lot of new developments, including Chandrayaan, Gaganyaan, Mangalyaan, all these new developments. But all these are all technology, what we lawyers have to do. So again, law has to come into play, and where regulatory lacuna is there, then industry won't sustain. That's what I want. Of course, I have eminent speakers with me, so let first we can take their views, and then I'll add on any input required. So with this, I'll start because we have 5 panelists. Each panelist, I request maybe 5 to 6 minutes. Just you raise your points so that we can finish, though already late, but on time. So without wasting time, I'll request Seema, partner and co-founder LexCounsel. Seema, you can take 5 to 6 minutes and put forward your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Reddy, for inviting us. The issue that we have with India in terms of space law is we do not have a space law which has an overarching umbrella. So let me come back with my own experiences when I started looking at space law 20 years back, and the issues that I found working with Antriksh, working with ISRO. What were the issues that we found? So we had a space SATCOM policy in 1997. We had some guidelines in 2000 onwards, but we had the policy, but I think what was missing was the soul of implementation in the right direction. The policy allowed foreign satellites to canalize their capacity through India. That happened. I was involved in several leases and canalization lease arrangements with ISRO and Antriksh. Antriksh was the commercial wing for the ISRO. And that enabled a lot of foreign satellites to come and provide services to India. Private sector was able to take capacity for broadcasting specifically. That happened. But the lacuna in that policy at that point of time was that a rider was kept, which enabled ISRO to, at the time of renewal, to shift the capacity from foreign satellites to INSAT satellite. So we have had clients who had to, after 2 years or 4 years, to shift the capacity back to the INSAT capacity because they became available. So that was one entry barrier for foreign capacity holders and satellite operators to come to ISRO, do the process of canalization, do the leasing arrangements, and then be left in a situation where the capacity is no longer required. That was one aspect. The second aspect that the ISRO really wanted to promote was the establishment of the Indian satellite systems. It was a great initiative. It was met with a lot of enthusiasm. I'm aware of many companies and many clients wanting to come to India. The practical difficulty was, while the policy was there, ISRO has an extremely restricted and cautious approach, and rightly so at that point of time, because traditionally ISRO was the entity which was managing the space objects and launch of satellites, and suddenly it was made open to private investors and private satellite operators. The national security, the interference issues, the monitoring issues, they were very relevant and real. So when the ISRO adopted a very cautious and restricted approach, that became an impediment for many foreign satellite operators to come to India at that point of time. The second issue that they faced at that point, and we faced as their advisors, were there was multiple approvals that we had to take as an ISS. We had to go to the committee for setting up the satellite. We had to go then to, the authorization was issued by Department of Space then. WPC was involved for slot coordination and spectrum allocation. And similarly, then we had to take FIPB approvals if there was any foreign investments, which was mostly the case. The kind of approvals and the length of the approvals were definitely a dampener. And in one of the case, which is a practical live experience we had to abandon the process after 3 to 4 years of continuing with the process with ISRO and Antriksh Corporation. So it was a lost opportunity and a lost effort to that extent. Availability of orbital slots was a huge issue. The resources were and is as of today scarce. And therefore, the policy anyway did not provide how to allocate the resources. Would it be an auction process? Would it be first come first service basis? That was with the Indian orbital slot issues. If the administration is bringing foreign slot, the process of bringing it under the Indian administration was really cumbersome. In one of the cases, it took us 3 to 4 years to go through the process. We had to obviously go through the WPC and ISRO to get the process done. But filing of the ITU applications, getting it allocated and getting it actualized was a pretty lengthy process. The other issue that we found was that the technology sharing, there was a lot of research, there was a lot of research and development and technology development which has been done by ISRO at that point of time. But the infrastructure was not enabling to share it with the startups, to share it with the new technology companies. To make that available or to have a partnering and collaborating approach was somewhere missing at that point of time, which we are seeing to have opened in the last 2 years. That was another challenge and is another challenge as of now as well, because at one angle, you have a regulatory hurdle in getting into the approval process. You have no surety of getting the slot allocated. You have no surety of frequency coordination being done and interference not being there. And then on top of it, you do not have financial investors backing that for obvious reasons because of the gestation period involved. I think all of that created a lot of I would say lack of development of specifically of the establishment of the Indian satellite system, which it could have. And on top of the story was the Devas Antriksh fallout with the termination of the contract. And at that point of time, I think there was a sort of non-cooperation, if I may say so, in terms of foreign satellite operators or foreign companies or Indian participant companies being, I would say, being welcome with their proposals. So things have changed over the last 2-3 years. There's a tremendous amount of impetus that we are seeing right now, starting from ISRO and the government bringing in policies, bringing in the satellite space activities bill and subsequent remote sensing policy and SATCOM policy, which is right now in the draft form. We look forward to having a different paradigm now, and I will, contribute subsequently and leave it for the other speakers to also contribute.
Thank you. Thank you, Seema. Yes, I agree with you. We don't have a space law. Lot of multiple approaches which are hindering the industry. There is no doubt. So we as a researcher, last 25 years, if you look at my first article in 1996 spoke about India needs space law, why India needs space law. Thank you very much, again, Seema, for raising these issues. Now I request Ashok GB, partner and advocate space law. Ashok, again, 5 to 6 minutes, please.
Sure. So I think the industry experience was very nicely captured by my predecessor speaker, so I'll not go much into that. But I think there is a fundamental disconnect on how the new policies are being perceived by members in the policy and the industry space and members in the governance space. While the effort was made to ensure that some of these mistakes of the previous policies are not repeated in the form of the new SpaceCom policies and the new remote sensing policies, what has happened is that the fundamental issues, multiple regulatory processes, multiple policies, lack of convergence between regulators, I think the seeds for some of these troubles continue to be sowed even in the new policies. And what happens is that if I have to fundamentally look at an investment in the satellite communication business, we need an orbital space, we need frequency, and we need an operational license to commercially deploy the combination of the frequency and the orbital slot that I've secured for my mission. Now, what happens in this process is there is still the SpaceCom policy or the DOT policies. It still does not tell me where the jurisdiction of the DOS begins and where it ends, and where the DOT's jurisdiction begins and where it ends. And IN-SPACe, though, is very promising as a new regulatory agency, the constitution, the functions, the powers, the responsibilities, the demarcation of its functions and powers, all of that remains a little bit unclear. So if I go back to the Antriksh Devas, arbitral award in the bilateral investment treaty dispute, or I look at the Supreme Court verdict in the cancellation of the 2G spectrum licenses, what emerges is a consistent theme of lack of convergence between regulators, different regulators approaching the same problem statement with different reasons. The outcome is that the industry is not getting sufficient clarity. And I think we still have some distance to get there in terms of the new policy. But I'm glad that the government is cognizant of this problem. I'm glad that there is an effort being made to revamp these policies. And I'm confident that if some of these lessons can be implemented in the text of these policies going forward, we should see a robust satellite industry emerge within the country without regulations becoming a problem.
Yes, Ashok?
I've concluded, sir.
Okay, conclude. Okay, thank you, Ashok. This is, definitely we have to learn lessons from the, previous mistakes or, lack of policies. I agree with you. So now I request Sagar Priyatham, Sagar, you can have again 6 to 7 minutes. Sagar?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to the organizers, and thank you, sir, for calling me. So I'll be brief as well. I think what I bring in, or what I would like to share here, is more a EU or a European perspective. I think Seema and Ashok did a good job, as always, and covering most of the Indian side of things. But what I would like to do very quickly is, I think for the last 2 days, of course, we have been talking about the relevance of the space sector or the space activities. But I would like to also point out that the relevance of space activities or space as a sector is growing on the political agenda of each and every country across the world. So starting with very recent meeting at the G7, where they spoke about space specifically. It's for the first time that they've actually spoken about space sector, and they have pointed out 2 specific topics: the importance of developing common standards, best practices and guidelines to make space operations safe and sustainable, and the need for a collaborative approach for space traffic management and coordination. So it just goes to show that the space is a strategic domain with a very strong geopolitical dimension. And it also goes to show that space matters for all of us, and it continues to be an enabler to a number of vertical sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's transport, you just name it, it's everywhere. And more importantly, what is key is, and for our discussion here, and going forward as well, is space is global in nature. We cannot just think that just because we have a national policy and then we are done. That cannot be the thinking. Just to give you some facts and figures in terms of what it means, space sector means for Europe or the European Union. So the EU space industry creates almost 10% of the union's GDP, and it is worth between 45 to 55 billion to the EU economy. And it provides around 230,000 jobs in fields like space operations, downstream services, and manufacturing. What I would also like to point out, and probably it has been stressed enough in the last 2 days in various sessions, the growth that we have seen, it's phenomenal. I mean, the global space economy grew by 6.7% on an average per year between 2005 and 2018. Which is twice the amount of on the average early growth we had, which was around 3.5%. The reason why I'm telling also is that there is this huge growth, which means that there should be revenue, there should be funding coming from various, whether it's venture-backed or the angel investors. And if you look at from 2000 onwards, or since 2000, we have seen over 180 plus angel and venture-backed space companies that have been founded, and combined, they make up around 66% of the investors in space ventures. And in the US itself, or US-based investors account for all around 66% of the 400 plus worldwide investors in space companies. I just wanted to show the importance not only for the technology community or the financial community, but also for the legal and the policy people, the growth in this sector. And that's the reason for showing those numbers or sharing those numbers. More specifically on the EU space strategy and EU space program, it's a good timing in terms of this conference as well, because the EU actually has adopted a regulation recently in April 2021, and have a very clear dedicated EU space program for the years 2021 to 2027. And what it means in real terms is the budget for the 7-year period that the EU space program is around 15 billion euros. In current prices, and this is for the first time they are also bringing together all the EU activities or space activities under one roof, which is also which goes in that direction, what Seema and also what Ashok pointed out, that fragmentation, even though there is a good legislation or a sound legal framework in the EU, but the fact that it has been fragmented across the member states in Europe, that has not been helpful. And also the fact that there are so many programs, Copernicus, Galileo, EGNOS, they brought all these various programs under one umbrella now, and going forward, they want to make sure that these programs are more relevant and futuristic as well. The space program also introduces new security components, such as the Space and Situational Awareness Program, or the new governmental satellite communication to monitor space hazards and provide national authorities with access to secure satellite communications. So it's critical, and also it's pretty important to see, or it's also good to see why the EU is emphasizing in this particular sector and the amount of investment that they're willing to put in their 7-year space program. So why do they want to do this? It's because they have a very clear space strategy. There are two specific areas of focus for the future for the EU. One is secure digital connectivity, and two, become a space entrepreneur, an entrepreneurship hub. So if I have to break down these 2 points, there are 4 specific ways they would like to deal with this. One, as I already pointed out, they would like to consolidate all the various programs, whether it's Galileo, Copernicus, EGNOS, everything under one umbrella. And the second point, the second way that they have, that they foresee in implementing their strategy is they would like to see that there is a connectivity. So what I mean by that is, or what the strategy means by that is, there should be a clear focus on infrastructure, and there should be a speed broadband to everyone. And also, as part of the future connectivity, they would also like to see that any kind of future external attacks are also mitigated. And the third way they would like to deal with this is the strategic autonomy. So they would like to develop European launcher industry to access space. And there is also a plan to initiate a European launcher alliance. And the fourth and the most important, or probably what is relevant for our discussion here and also for our audience, and along with the industry or policymakers, is the program they have set up called Space Entrepreneurship. This is a 1 billion European space funded space fund, and it's called under the name Cassini, and will be it's going to be established to boost startups and space innovation. So again, it's just to show that the role space is playing, and Europe would like to show that they're taking a leadership role in the space sector. Of course, you know what comes with it, despite all the good things and the funding available, there are still a number of challenges, and I think some of the speakers earlier as well pointed out, but let me just reiterate a couple of points again here. So in terms of the challenges, one is the high upfront investments, and that seems to be continually being a deterrent, particularly at scale-up phase, because it's quite difficult to find funds, especially for tech companies. And then the other point is also that investors do not see the exit opportunity yet. So from a financial standpoint, these high upfront investments are not helpful. The second point is the immature markets. So the space ecosystem lacks investors with a space background and space investment expertise, and investors are mostly concerned by the market being very immature. The third is the highly technological way in which the sector is dealing, and which is understandable. But what it means is it's creating a barrier for all the small and the medium enterprises, and companies in both upstream and downstream sectors seem to be struggling with access to finance and also access to skills, which is equally important. And the last point, I see that as a major challenge, and that's the purpose of this panel as well, is the regulatory uncertainty. I think Seema and Ashok has already pointed out the difficulties in whether it's the fragmentation or whether the what uncertainty means when we do not have a clear picture. So the predictability and the certainty are of course key for investments, and the earlier speakers in the panel were also reiterating this point. So what is important here is when we talk about regulatory certainty, or to create that certainty, we need to have a vision. I think what we are missing today, and that has a direct link to whatever we are trying to do in the legal and the policy realm, is the vision. Even though we are thinking that we have a vision, but somewhere the fact that it's not syncing up, or the fact that it is not playing all together, but actually having a multi-layered approach in everything that we are doing, from various policies being built up, I think is not good for the industry. I think I'll stop there, but maybe one last point I would like to emphasize or reiterate is, for the policymakers especially, is the access to finance. I think India as well needs to create a fund to encourage entrepreneurship, even though we have, and as outlined by the representative from the government earlier, that there are incentives for innovative means and all, but I think it's not enough. I don't think, despite all these good policies in place and the vision, we definitely need access to these financial means. I'll stop there, and maybe I take up questions at a later point, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar, enlightening us forward-looking European policy and the kind of job opportunity and economy they have. So I think India should learn, some lessons from them. So thank you. So now I request Dr. Ranjana Kaul, partner to Associates. Ranjana madam has done again, a lot of space law popularization. I think, ma'am, over to you.
Well, good evening and thank you, Ashok. Good to see you, and Sagar to reconnect. Hello, Seema. We haven't met.
Yes.
So now, after hearing all the many roadblocks at multiple levels that Seema and Ashok spoke of, and what Sagar told us about which direction EU is going, and yet for all that they have, they still have challenges. Now, quite clearly, we have a very steep road up ahead. So let me start by saying that firstly, thank you to SIA, but I'm delighted at the title over here. The title is Regulatory Framework for Private Participation in Space Economy. Now, this is the first time that I'm seeing any reference to the space sector as a contributor to the, space economy, but space economy as part of the national economy. And I believe that that is the focus with which we need to go. It is true that there was this announcement of participation of private sector in all aspects of space activities, and there have been earlier attempts at that 2017 draft bill, the Space Activities Bill, and one, in fact, even earlier in January 2015, and we had a workshop in the ISRO where I was invited as well. But let's use Elon Musk's theory. If it's not working, just sweep it off, get a sheet of new paper and a brand new fountain pen, and let's now work from there. So what I'm reminded of this when I see space economy, my mind goes back to 1990-91 when India's economy was uncapped. At that point in time, it was a government of India decision to unlock, and they called it back then, they called it partial deregulation of very many sectors of this Indian economy, including, in fact, telecommunications. And that's where we now have a global company, which was a startup at that time, Airtel, without any previous background to telecom. But here he is, and just been given a license, as we hear from the news on the net, for broadband satellite services. That's taken, it's a 30-year journey, but it is a 30-year journey of companies that never had any previous experience. You have now a platform where already those people with 30 years experience are wanting to hit the road running. You have new space companies that's happened despite the government and its regulations, despite the Department of Space, and despite everything else. And for me personally, I'm very proud of my young friends and colleagues who every now and then we're in touch with each other. It's really, for me, it's very inspiring. And in the middle of all this, we have a large number of our legacy companies, our manufacturers who are already part of the ISRO procurement ecosystem, and other big corporates that are interested in aerospace. So what is the starting point? I believe that we should borrow the idea from when our economy was uncapped 30 years ago. The government of India needs to step into this place. It cannot be only one department trying its best to come up with a policy prescription or a draft policy prescription to the best of its ability, the best of its understanding, and inspired by what it knows best. It is designed to be India's national space agency. If you look at the allocation of business rules, that is exactly what it says it is. So if you're expecting a skill set at drafting and looking at many different aspects, we're not being fair. But to be fair to the prescription of the emergence of a space economy in India, ideally we should have had some data sets. Every policy maker and anybody who's trying to draft law needs to know what is the lay of the land here. As far as I know, in public domain, there is no data set on the Indian space economy, let's say 1990 to 2010. Why 2010? That's the first, I think, private space company that was incorporated. Am I right, Ashok? Dhruva Space? Was it incorporated? Or somewhere there, give or take 1 or 2 years. And then the last 10 years with this sui generis evolution of the new space companies. And in the middle, so we got 3 sets of people who are all set to go, excepting that they don't know where to go. And there is a highway that is temptingly taking them towards the international airports. So now this is not a happy situation. I would suggest, therefore, that we get, like I said, a brand new sheet of paper and fountain pen. So what is it that we need to do? First and foremost, if indeed the space sector is to be partially deregulated, such that there is space and a reason to get the space private companies into action, then you have to have an objective. And I will borrow from EU and say that our own experience of 30 years, it must be looked at in a 30-year time frame. Within that 30-year, we need milestones of what is to be achieved. So instead of dashing off trying to write out a space activities bill and so on and so forth, I think what we do need, again borrowing from 91, is a framework for a policy framework for private participation in the space sector. That is what you want. If that is the case, then the starting point of it is to ask who is going to be the regulator. The obvious answer, of course, that's an easy one. It's the Department of Space. The next question is the format of the Department of Space as it stands now with the allocation of business rules and whatever that goes with it, is it designed as it stands now to also regulate private sector space activities? The limited experience being the procurement. Now, here are the things that I'd like to highlight, and I'll say this quickly without too much, is that I do not want to speak about the ground segment for the reason that we have very robust normative laws and the entire ecosystem is functioning on normative laws, the law of contract, special conditions of contract, general condition, the FR rules and all that. We don't need to now come up, such as the draft policy has done, that draft activities bill has done, to create a whole set of regulations that actually destabilize the ground segment. And the question to ask is why. So let's not discuss that 2017. Let's just forget about that. Let's start new. So the question to ask is, we are now looking, I want to concentrate on the space segment. Now that is what is only a domain for the incumbent, that is to say Department of Space, ISRO, etc. So what are the cardinals? The cardinals are those 5 treaties, of which Outer Space Treaty is the ex cathedra. It lays down the basic principles, and let's focus on that. The most important of which, and which we all know, is embedded in Article 6 and Article 7 and Article 8. So first, I'll talk about Article 8 because that is to do with registration of space objects, and a register of space objects is required to be established by any country that has a space program where private sector participation is involved. Now, why am I speaking of Article 8 first is because that requirement is already embedded in what is popularly referred to as SATCOM policy. It is actually a framework for implementation of satellite communications in India. It is a policy framework for implementation of satellite communications in India 2000. This happened in consequence of the change of the new telecom policy 99, which decided to introduce satellite communications in India and appropriately amended the Telegraph Act. And this SATCOM policy, which you will find, is actually not to do with satellite communications, but the prescription for what the Department of Space has to do in context to providing hardware in outer space for the purpose of enabling that rollout. So now let's use that. So what is it? The fact of the matter is that India is a state party to all these conventions and these agreements, which are outer space treaties, the 5 of them. And the 2 most important are international responsibility and the fact that the state is internationally liable for damage caused in outer space, in airspace, and on Earth. So when the state is undertaking its activities, well, it is responsible for what it does, it's liable for its assets. And it is also indirectly responsible and liable for activities conducted by private sector companies. And that is where we come to the question of insurance and liability and the quantum and so on and so forth, about which we do not have as yet any clarity of what is the thinking on the subject from our own. How does this happen? The allocation of business rules is issued under certain constitutional provisions. And in specific context to outer space, what it does is that under Article 51 of Constitution, which is a directive principle of state policy, it has allocated the business of, and I'll read this, to promote, all international relation matters connected with space, including the specialized agencies and relations with countries and so on. So that is what the Department of Space does. It represents India in engaging with this entire ecosystem, which is the international ecosystem. But then it is also conducting activities in outer space. Now, how does that happen? That happens because Article 53 of Constitution provides Department of Space the legal capacity to exercise delegated power for the purpose of undertaking space activities, and that is how we undertake space activities. The question that arises is, and this together is what is referred to India's state practice. The question then arises is, has this state practice ever been put to test? Why? Because undertaking activities and implementing the obligations arising out of outer space treaties, that is liability and responsibility, are 2 very different situations. Undertake, we undertake. Have we ever been called upon to actually discharge a liability because a national space asset caused damage to any other state's asset or a private sector, or because our space asset was actually adversely impacted by some others and therefore we needed to seek reparation for it? Well, that has fortunately not happened. And at this moment, as we talk about private sector participation in space, I think it's an opportune moment for the government of India to engage in a complete and comprehensive exercise to ascertain whether or not the Department of Space, as it is at present, capable of implementing and discharging the obligations under the space treaties. And I suspect that we will find that that is not the case. Why? Because the issue of the scope and extent of exercise of delegated authority has been subject of review before the Supreme Court multiple times. And for one thing, as far as 53 is concerned, and relevant in context to 51, is that international treaties on their own do not have the force of municipal law. So they cannot be implemented. It needs a special law to implement them. And in addition to that, specifically, if a foreign power has to be paid money, that has to be drawn from the consolidated fund of India. Now, in this case, if a state asset causes damage, and of course money has to be paid, it needs a special law. And similarly, there are 4 exceptions. Now, in that view of the matter, what is the solution? The solution lies in Article 253, which says that the Parliament, the legislature, has the power to enact a law to implement international treaties. So you forget about Space Activities Bill and all that. First and foremost, if the Department of Space, and indeed the Department of Space must be the regulator because it has the domain expertise, then it must be properly empowered to be able to deal with private sector participation and implement and discharge obligations correctly. And so what we need really is a Space Act, a National Space Act. And that Space Act must broadly harmonize all the obligations that are in the Space Treaty. The Outer Space Treaty gives you a pretty good list of it, and empower Department of Space to regulate that sector and the law-making part. I mean the rules and regulations making part. Now, what will those rules and regulations be? We've already heard chapter and verse from both our previous speakers. They've had first-hand experience. It is a matter of institutional mindset. So simply laws won't help. We need a lot of, a lot of workshops, a lot of training, a lot of, you talk of confidence building, but I really don't know what that means. Confidence building measures, I do not know what it really translates to, but we need a lot of effort. Also, let me say that even in the first phase of uncapping of the economy, there was a lot of pushback. And government, by its very nature, will protect the incumbent. But over here, what the incumbent is doing is a very different vertical than what private sector should be doing. Yes, there will be some areas of conflict, if you like. I mean, but one thing I'm happy about is the announcement that New Space India Limited will be an operator. It will be a satellite operator, including whether it builds it or it leases it from ISR. Right? If that is the case, and Ashok, Seema, and everyone else here, it is a company under Companies Act. And therefore, it is at par with any other private sector company because they're all under the Companies Act. So will there be level playing field, especially in context to this very complex issue of liability and insurance? This is truly a internationally complex kind of a situation to determine. So will there be level playing field? Maybe, maybe not. But I can fully understand that if there's a problem with any of the satellites that New Space owns and is operating, being in some adverse condition in outer space, that the entire state machinery will back it and make sure that, matters are resolved. But what happens to the private sector? Unless the law that is made, the rules that are made, provide actionable rights to Indian space companies, persons and companies, to be able to resolve, you need actionable rights to be able to file a claim. And we need to have that. That Space Activities Bill was conspicuous by the absence of anything that provided any form of right to the private sector companies. So these are two aspects that I have been thinking about a lot. And I do believe that it cannot be only the Department of Space. We are seeing these draft bills, which are really concepts that are being thrown up, and some of them a little off track, such as the space-based communications, where Ashok, you were talking about somehow those boundaries getting completely, you have no idea where one ends and where the other one starts. But the point is that you need clarity. I mean, this is what Sagar, you've been emphasizing on, that you need predictability, you need clarity, and for that, basic concepts have to be clear. You can't just start penning off, the last chapter of your book before figuring out what it is that you want to say. You need to know where your heading is, where the introduction is, and what's going to happen. We need the complete involvement of the Government of India and all the related arms of the Government of India to focus and get this together if indeed private sector is to participate in a beneficial manner. And second of all, so as much as strengthening of Department of Space to be able to do this, the one sector, and I think, I don't know which one of you spoke about spectrum, the WPC, which is the Wireless Planning and coordination wing is and has been until now in passive mode. It is a department under the DOT, Department of Telecom. It's a wing under the Department of Telecom in the Ministry of Communications. Now, the exponential expansion of technology and new services and all the demands that will be made on spectrum make it incumbent upon government to consider strengthening it outside and beyond being just a department. A wing. I think it needs to be a full-fledged department, as much as the geopolitical context that Sagar was giving us, as much as space is highly secure. I mean, in fact, it's a military zone. It's all about security. It's all about geopolitics. It's all about commerce. And all of these things are meshed in. As much as that is that domain, spectrum is a highly sensitive and very critical asset, natural asset for any government. And that the WPC has to be strengthened. It should be, in fact, a department like the Department of Space under the purview of the Prime Minister, just like atomic energy. That's how valuable spectrum is, both for security and strategic purposes and for. So these are a few things that came to my mind, and so I hope it happens, actually. That's my ardent wish.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Bala.
Thank you, ma'am. I think ma'am started with, a liberalization policy of 1991. I think we can learn lessons from that policy. So why liberalization? We all know that because of balance of payment crisis, a lot of things, in those days used to be happening. So anyhow, and one more thing she raised, the right thing is Article 6 and 7 of the Outer Space Treaty. You all know that, friends, Outer Space Treaty happened in 60s. And today, a lot of private participation is happening in the space sector. That is where a lot of debates are going on, that whether private parties should be liable. So that is again, Madam has brought out, thing. So with this, thank you, ma'am. And now I ask Nikhil Narendran, partner TMT Trilegal. Nikhil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I believe that today is in fact a special day because this is the day when we saw OneWeb being granted GMPSC license and also the VSAT license. And this is quite significant because, like Ranjana ma'am mentioned, it was a startup 30 years back, and now it has really come of age. And we probably have a true Indian space company for that matter. Which is actually into SATCOM for that matter, right? So I think this is arguably the only SATCOM company which has got the ability to deliver voice and non-voice. It also can do backhaul, which is quite phenomenal. We need to really see the license to figure out what are the conditions that's imposed, because the way I see it, the GMPS is relatively stress-free, but in terms of the license conditions that's imposed on VSAT, there's bound to be some problem for any low Earth orbit satellite players to operate in India. So I think one of the aspects being that, look, most of the low Earth orbit satellites, if it's deployed from outside India, if it's a foreign satellite object, then that's bound to create problems under the current policy. So I would say that, look, I pretty much agree with most of the points that has been shared by my panelists. I, in fact, agree with pretty much all of them. A few points to specifically add on. I think one of the reasons why we probably miss the bus when it comes to space activities and increasing private participation in the sector is that of course, space is a sensitive sector. It's a strategically important sector, and we are surrounded by not so friendly neighbors for that matter. So from that sense, I think our government has always been careful, and sometimes a bit too careful when it comes to strategic matters, and ensure that the control of satellites operating from India always resided in India. There always needs to be a network operation center which is based out of India, which is under the control of the Department of Telecommunication. The spectrum allotment is to the Wireless Planning Committee that ma'am mentioned some time back. So the idea was that the government's policy around this was very much centric towards an Indian operator to really enter the space, rather than to really promote any sort of foreign investment in the space. So we have seen several of the applications for foreign satellite companies entering India and establishing their presence as Indian satellite, the ISS for that matter, and have been either rejected or kept on hold due to these sort of concerns arising from the government side. We suddenly see an ATL being granted, or OneWeb being granted the license, one of the few Indian players to start in this place and come up within a matter of, I would say, record time, because it seems like they applied for the license sometime in May and end of May, and they got a license already, which is fantastic news. But I think a few things to keep in mind when we look at this, the space policy per se. I would say that 99 policy per se is not really geared towards what you call a space comm or the space communications per se. It's more to do with command and control of the satellite, right? So it's about putting that space object, utilization of the satellite, which is already there in the space, and handling that was really the part of the 99 policy. Whereas the rest of the part, which dealt with space comm or the telecommunication part of it, was left to the DOT to figure out in terms of VSAT communication or the GMPSA communication, etc., etc. And it actually creates some sort of an issue. The way I look at it, which I believe my other panelists also pointed out, is that, look, one is there is a department which is handling activities relating to exploration and activities relating to commercial exploitation of the space. And then there is a completely different department which is dealing with spectrum allotment and matters relating to telecommunication. So the question comes up, which is the right authority to deal with matters relating to spacecom? And we need to really look at space exploration and tourism and economic activities in the space different from spacecom itself, because spacecom is about communication, and ideally it should not be dealt in a different manner compared to any other communication activities in India. So I am personally of the opinion that the Department of Telecommunication is arguably the right authority to deal with matters relating to spacecom. Whereas the DOS, if it is the right authority, Ranjana ma'am raised some very pertinent questions with respect to whether we need DOS to continue doing this. I also believe that, look, I am a big fan of ISRO. I've been a fanboy and since the time I could remember, because I grew up in Trivandrum, and VSSC is around, and I used to go for my weekend trips to just fascinated at the sort of exhibits there. It used to be a big part of my life growing up. I continue to be a big fan of ISRO, but I'm not entirely sure if that is the correct authority when it comes to handling matters relating to commercial exploitation of the space per se. So the question comes up, do we need a different authority? Do we need a different agency to handle matters relating to exploitation of economic rights and economic interest with respect to space? I believe, yes, we need to have a different authority, whether it's DOS, do we need another body to sort of overlook it? I think we should probably look at it. And of course, space communication should continue to be in the hands of DOT, who has been very good in handling all matters relating to licenses and communication in the several past years. Few other things that we also need to remember if you want to really increase private participation in the space is, look, it's a very, very high capital intensive sector, right? You need tremendous amount of capex if you want to start the space business, and you need access to the latest technology. You need to the access to the best of the technology available in the world, so that we can handle matters relating to space control, command and control, matters relating to data transfer, matters relating to service provision with surveillance, etc. We need best of the technology, otherwise we'll actually be left behind. So how do we incorporate a policy whereby it's possible for us to bring together the foreign capital, the foreign technology, and help our Indian players also achieve the scale that's needed so that we can compete in the world, and also deliver the best world-class services to the Indian citizens? So I believe that we need to probably relook at the policy with respect to starting from even investments, for that matter, with respect to the satellite sector per se. And strategically, we need to encourage Indian players with foreign participation so that they can get access to capital and technology, so that we can empower them to scale greater heights. Because satellite is not just about, it's not merely about space tourism. I mean, it's not merely about the strategic interest. It's not really about the weather reports or defense and other aspects. There is a real key element that satellite can play in terms of bridging the rural-urban gap. And it can act as a wonderful instance of backhaul when it comes to communication. It can provide connectivity in rural areas for various matters, including governance and delivery of health services, etc., etc. So we need to create that ecosystem, and to create that ecosystem, we need to encourage more private participation by also encouraging foreign investment participation also in the space, keeping in mind our strategic and defense angles in mind. And we have done that very successfully in telecom. It's just that I think in the last few years we sort of scared several of the telecom investors with what happened with the flight of capital in the telecom, so to speak, after the 2G scam happened. Other than that, I think we've done exceedingly well in terms of imposing the right kind of restrictions on such foreign players operating in India, ensuring that the management and control are in the Indian hands so that the government could also get some sort of strategic control over these entities while operating in India. So we have a model that worked almost flawlessly. I would say, we just need to probably just forget the 2G scam, but I would say that it worked almost beautifully well till some point of time. And whatever said and done, our telecom industry has really come of age. Now we have participants from the telecom industry who are ready to enter the space com sector per se. We need to encourage that. We need to encourage more participation of foreign players as well, so that we can also see the LEO satellite space entering India in a big level. And I believe that LEO is the low Earth orbit satellite, or the LEO 1 is probably arguably one of the most revolutionary aspects when it comes to SATCOM itself, because it gives us the ability to connect to the satellites in a much better technologically efficient manner. And we will need to make tweaks and make amends to several of the telecom license to make that happen. So I think one classic example is the VSAT license, where there is a restriction on provision of backhaul that needs to be clarified and cleared immediately. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has already done that. It's just a question of when the government is enforcing that and issuing that as a guideline. Hopefully, we'll see that when the new license comes, because it seems like Airtel OneWeb has got a license and it will probably be there already. So that's one immediate step that needs to be done. The second step that needs to be done, of course, is the question about whether we need to be so fixated with the INSAT capacity when it comes to delivering of LEO satellites. If I'm not wrong, I believe that there's no LEO equivalent by the INSAT. I could be wrong, but the question is, how do we leverage LEO satellites? We may need to open up the policy around allowance of foreign satellites, at least when it comes to SpaceCom, which is less strategic, because your limb-related legal intercept monitoring related obligations, etc., could be handled on ground. There is no real strategic play here when it comes to the kind of control that you need to have over a LEO satellite, provided that you have a network operations center in India. So I believe that we need to think ahead. I mean, a lot of things have changed from the time a GMPSC license or a VSAT license was issued. Then it's time to take a relook at those licenses. It's time to put the onus and responsibility on DOT to manage all aspects relating to SpaceCom, and other space exploration and command and control should continue to be governed by the DOS, or if required, we should review that at the right time to ensure that we need much more speedy, faster action when it comes to foreign participation or private participation in the space economy per se. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. It's I grew up learning space law from your articles and writing, so it's an honor to share the stage with you.
Okay, thank you, Nikhil. Thank you for your space commerce to space communication and highlighting various issues pertaining to that. I know we are already beyond time. I don't want to take much time, a minute or 2 minutes. Just I want to summarize our space journey from 1960s to present. If you look at earlier, we used to have a scientific technology era, and now we moved to commerce business era. That is where a lot of private participation is happening. Government of India has initiated many initiatives, including Antrix Corporation, and if you look at recent past last 3-4 years, new initiatives like InSpace, InSail, Atmanirbhar, all these part of the encouraging the private participation in the space industry. So, but definitely one lacuna, that is a regulatory mechanism, though Space Activities Bill 2017 is still in pending. I think that is going to solve many the issues which we all raised. I hope it should come. So with this, already we are half an hour late. I don't want to take much time. I'm going to hand over mic to organizers. Thank you for everyone, all the speakers, Seema, Ashok, Sagar, Ranjana ma'am, and Nikhil for very efficiently put forwarding your points, very crisp manner. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Baby, for excellent what you have done for the last 2 days. I think it's a herculean task for you, and thanks, our heartiest thanks to you for comparing this so well, and you're taking time on that. And thank you, everyone. I think we had a excellent 2 day proceeding of this conference, very well said, inaugural session, then followed by 2 sessions yesterday and 4 sessions back to back. And it is very well attended. Yesterday we had count of 300 plus participants live, and now when we are closing, we still have 240 participants live. So it is excellent, and this representation has come from 14 countries, and 48 speakers have contributed in the deliberation. It's a fantastic journey for us, and I think it's a debut conference, and we thank you each one, everyone, to make this happening and successful. And I must thank that our partners, the associate partners, associations, and industrial partner who without that we were not able to make success. That Anand Technologies, the Inmarsat, SES, and Viasat. And thanks for that. And also our knowledge partner Feedback Advisory and our academia partner NALSAR University. Thank you very much. There is other partners also who have helped up to make this happening. And also we would like to thank our president, Dr. Subbarao Pavuluri, who has great strength of player for us, and he has been with us for the journey of making this conference so successful, and also the executive board member. And also I want to thank the SIA-INDIA team, that my colleague Chitrita, Rajiv, Sudipta, Anubhav, and Manoj. So thank you very much. I just want to make one parting announcement with all of you. But this deliberation is not just ending here. It's a big thing for us, and we are going to set up a interest group for each session, and we will take it forward, because I know this is a time constraint, and that whatever deliberation we have done in a very limited time, and we want this to bring it to the bigger platform, and each session will convert it to the interest group, and this interest group will meet, and they probably will have a bigger session or for each session. With that note, thank you again, once again, on behalf of SATCOM Industry Association. We're looking forward to your patronage in coming a series of our webinar activities. And we are also coming out with the report of this conference, the all deliberation, and also set of recommendations, which we would like to share with the policymaker and all the relevant department who are concerned with the SATCOM policy and their implementation. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.